Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome back, students. Today we'll start the next part of our course, which is about data collection, analysis, and results conclusion section. To put it in context, we've already covered the part up till the development of questionnaire or instrument, and we've also covered how we prove the reliability and validity of our instrument. And now we are moving on to collection of data, analysis and interpretation of data, and drawing of conclusions. As a part of it, you come up with limitations, recommendations, and future research. But before I start today's session, I like to emphasize that the actual analysis of data, which usually for quantitative data, which usually takes analysis through software, and for even for qualitative data, we have software that does various analysis for us, including thematic analysis. So that is not included in the scope of our course. But still, since we are following a complete cycle, which starts from generating an idea for research and ends at actually publishing a paper out of it. So we'll cover it. Maybe obviously not in great detail because there's another course in the MS Engineering Management program by the name of uh, quantitative analysis and decision making. So this analysis and data interpretation part, it is covered in that course. Obviously, that course is not a subset of research methodology. It is an independent course, so there's a lot of other body of knowledge that you gain when you go through that course. But the point I'm trying to make is that what we'll be studying today, and in perhaps in some parts of subsequent classes, it is not in the scope of our course, but we are doing it because we want to complete the loop of the course that we adopted for this particular research methodology course. Okay, so the first part is data collection. Uh, there are a few things that we need to know about data collection, and before that, let's see what is the objective of collecting data. So the idea is to capture quality evidence that allows analysis to lead to the formulation of convincing and credible answers to the research questions or hypotheses. So basically, you have a research question or a set of hypotheses or multiple research questions, and you want answers for them. The idea of collecting data is to support your answers with quality evidence which is acceptable to the scientific community. So that is why you collect data. Well, when collecting data, you have to collect two types of data. One is primary data, and the other is secondary data. We talked about it in our third module, but we'll quickly revise it. The primary data is the data that the researcher, you collect yourself. You generate that data, and secondary data is the part which was collected and turned into knowledge or papers by other people, and you are just reading or understanding that data so that you can build your research on top of it. So secondary data is in a way uh, what we call literature review, because you build your research on already published literature, and primary data is what you add to the literature. So there are three approaches to primary data collection. Again, we've studied in detail what qualitative research and data collection is, what quantitative research and data collection is, and when you mix both of them, which happens in most of the researches, in most of the papers, in most of the researches, if you want to gain a fairly in-depth understanding of what you're studying, you have to perhaps do both qualitative and quantitative and data collection. So when you mix both of them, it is called mixed method. So all good papers, well, maybe there are exceptions, but most of the good papers, they used they you would see that they've used mixed method approach. So we'll quickly look at qualitative and quantitative data collection, and obviously mixed method means some part from qualitative and some from quantitative. So there are many tools that you use uh, in qualitative data collection. The qualitative research method of data collection does not involve the collection of data that involves numbers or needs to be deducted through through a mathematical calculation. It is rather based on non-quantifiable elements like for example, feeling or emotion of a researcher. An example of such method could be an open-ended questionnaire. An open-ended questionnaire is where you do not have specific questions. You have your ideas converted into broader questions, and you let the respondent express themselves. You don't limit them in as you do in qualitative survey-based questionnaires. So the other tools that are used for qualitative data collection, they include online forums, they include in-depth interviews, they basically maybe focus groups. Will quickly have a look at each of them later, but the idea is that you want to understand something in greater detail, and while trying to understand it, uh, you're not putting your respondents in a very stringent framework. You want them to express themselves so that your understanding of the phenomena increases from and you understand how this situation is from their perspective. Well, some quantitative data collection tools, obviously, uh, when you want to collect quantitative data, it could be uh, simple questionnaires which you can send by mail, or you can actually go face to face with your respondents and collect your data, or maybe you can call them and collect your answers, or maybe you can float your questionnaires online, or even it is possible that you may not have any respondents. You collect your data from websites of various organizations. For example, if you're doing a research about uh, finance, perhaps the financial statements of organizations would be with the source of your data. Similarly, if you're doing research about the Duckworth-Lewis system, perhaps you'll be looking at the data from cricketing websites. So, and the idea is to collect data from whatever way possible, but it is quantitative in nature. So, quantitative methods, they are presented in numbers basically, and they require a mathematical calculation to deduce whatever you want to come up with. An example would be the use of a questionnaire with close-ended questions to arrive at figures which are to be calculated mathematically. Also, methods of correlation and regression and so many other mathematical tests, they are used once you have your data. Okay, so as I discussed earlier, secondary data is the process of collecting data that is already existing, and there could be so many uh, sources of it. Basically, it's the literature that you are studying. Now what we'll do is we'll look at some standard data collection tools. We'll see what are their uses, and we'll see what are their limitations. But before that, let's look at what is a data collection tool. Well, a data collection tool is a device or an instrument which you use to collect data and it could be a paper or an online questionnaire, it could be a case study, it could be a set of checklists, it could be your interviews, which could be physical interviews, one to one, face to face, or it could be online interviews, it could be your observation, it could be surveys, so it could be so many things. But it is really important to decide the tool for data collection for a particular research. Why? Because every tool has different capabilities, and research is carried out in different ways and for different purposes. So you must clearly know which tool is the most appropriate for you to collect data for your research. So far, we've made a questionnaire or a set of questions, and we've proven that our questionnaire was valid and reliable. But how do you collect data, and what are the pros and cons of it? And perhaps what additional ways of data collection you can use to ensure that your research is comprehensive. This is the part that we want to appreciate in our next few slides. So the first data collection tool that we are looking at is interviews. Well, in interviews, there could be many types, but the most used types are structured questionnaires, which are basically uh, questionnaires that have very fixed questions, and your respondents, they choose options given by you uh, against those questions, or maybe you've given them space to write their answers in a prose manner, but yet still your questions are fixed. Then our semi-structured questionnaires. Well, uh, uh, semi-structured questionnaires are somewhere between structured and unstructured questionnaires. Unstructured questionnaires are where your questions are not open-ended, they are not closed-ended. They are open-ended questions, and you do not control your respondents in the way that they respond to you. So, what is an open-ended question? An open-ended question is a question where you do not have you do not expect to get a fixed set of responses. You do not have 4 or 5 choices from which the respondent has to choose. They are open-ended, and respondent can express themselves in whatever way they want. So in that way, it becomes necessary that you do not direct your respondents to too much, so that they can express themselves. But again, you cannot totally leave your research to a situation where it goes haywire. So you must have some limitations, some borders, some framework, and you ask your questions, but they should be open-ended. And semi-structured, they are between unstructured and structured questionnaires. So the questions that you ask in semi-structured questionnaires, they're also between open-ended questions and closed-ended questions, which are used in structured questionnaires. Uh, if you want, you can record your interview, but remember that you have to have the consent of the respondent to record. Now, what are the good parts with interviews? Well, the good part is that you get uh, in-depth information. You have the flexibility, especially in unstructured interviews, and data accuracy is very high because you are engaging the respondent physically. You can see the way they are answering questions, how focused they are, and how seriously they're answering you. What is the negative part of it? What are the cons of it? That it is time consuming, because if you as a researcher you go to each and every respondent, it will take a lot of time. And secondly, it is expensive because not only in terms of time, but also you may have to travel a lot. You may have to well, if you're incentivizing your research, maybe you'll have to spend a lot of money on it. And the second tool we are going to look at is questionnaires. Well, questionnaires could also be of 3 types on lines of interviews, but Again, the idea is that if you're doing a purely quantitative research, your questionnaire would be completely structured. You would have clearly decided preset questions, and in most of the cases you would give options to your respondents to answer those questions. But if you're doing a qualitative research, your questionnaire would be fairly unstructured. Again, why? Same reason that we discussed in interviews, because we want to get in-depth knowledge from the respondents and we don't want to limit them to a set of options. Well, questionnaires, they are when compared to interviews, they can collect large data, because you can administer your questionnaire in so many ways to your respondents and they can do it in their own times. It is relatively inexpensive, again, because you can send them online or through mail. And another good part is that the data that you collect, it could be visualized and analyzed easily by putting the data into software. The cons of it, they include less depth. Why? Because obviously you're not present in when each question is being answered, so you don't really know if your respondent, they lose interest while answering your questions, and they may thus give you inaccurate data. Well, another tool is observation. What is observation? It's the idea is that you observe a particular situation or a particular case. You can do it either as a complete observer, which has the person who's acting as observer. He's absolutely not involved in the situation. He's distanced from the situation, but he or she is only observing it. Another way is that you are a participant, like there are 20 or 30 people and you're one of them and you're observing. And it could be a mix of being an observer or a participant. The good part is that it's easy to do. You just have to sit and look at things or maybe be part of things, and it is accurate because you're experiencing it firsthand. And the con side is that you cannot always observe the situation, and even if you observe, there is a chance that the people that you're observing, they are aware of your presence and they do not act naturally because an observer is present. And another con is that there could be a bias uh, from the researcher's perspective, especially when he or she is a participant of the situation. But to ensure that your observation, when you're collecting data, it remains focused, you can actually make a checklist of what you have to observe, and you can take your notes against each part of your checklist. The next tool is focus groups. It is another data collection method in which you uh, ask open-ended questions to usually a group of 6 to 10 people. And what is the good part about it? The good part is that people, they listen to each other, all the people who are in the focus group, so their opinions, they get enriched. They listen from to each other, so when they speak, it is not a standalone thought, but it is an enriched thought which takes into consideration what other members of the group think. It is cost effective and it is very detailed because people are allowed to express themselves. The con side is that it could be biased. Again, it's the flip side of being enriched. Uh, Another con is that there are some people who are vocal and they can hijack the entire discussion. And what you have to ensure is that the interviewer or the person who is running the focus group, he has to be skilled. He knows how to conduct such sessions and how to steer discussions. The next is, or the last one is, the case study method. Again, we've discussed it quite a few times in our course already, but again, at a summary level, it's Basically, the idea is that you focus on very small numbers, perhaps only one, to gain highly contextual and in-depth qualitative data about a complex issue. Uh, what does a complex issue mean? Uh, when you say complex, you means too many variables, a large number of variables. That is what complex is. And the opposite of complex is simple, in which you have very few variables. So uh, if you want to visualize the difference between complex and simple, think of your boxes and arrows diagram. If it has too many boxes, it is a complex case. If it has a few boxes, it is a simple case. So if your diagram is too complex, it has too many variables, perhaps a case study is a good way to collect data. Another issue with case study method is, another challenge I would say is that the protocols are uh, of doing a case study, they are not very well defined. There are three famous professors. Professor Robert K. Yen, he's made an attempt. Well, he has a famous book on case study methods, and so many editions of it have been published. In the 2017 edition, and which was a consequence of one of his papers, he has tried to give a very specific framework of doing a case study, but it has not been like globally accepted. Why? Because there are many other thoughts. Another professor, Mariam Sharan, she has another perspective on it. It's called the pragmatic constructivist perspective, which is kind of an evolving way of doing a case study, in which you go into a particular situation and you adopt to whatever you get. And then there's another perspective of Professor Stake, Robert Stake. He has a relativist, constructivist, interpretivist perspective, which means it is even more contextual than what Professor Mariam Sharon believes. He says that it has to be absolutely uh, relative to the situation, and you should have no framework when you start a case study to ensure that you learn the most about your problem. Well, I have added two readings for you. One is a case study method, step-by-step guide for business researchers, which is a paper of International Journal of Qualitative Methods. You can read it to understand a lot more about case study methods. And another one, which is another uh, paper, case study research foundations and ideological orientations. I've placed both of them on your group, and you can read them, especially those who are doing case study. Okay, so that was about data collection. Now we'll look at data analysis. As I said, data analysis is not in the scope of uh, our course, but we'll have a quick look at it. And in the classes that will follow, I'll show you examples of data analysis. I'll show you how you put data in software. I'll show you what tests you do on certain examples of data, and that will give you ideas about your own research, and perhaps you can do the tests that you think are the most relevant to your research. So data analysis, what is it, particularly in context of research methodology? The idea is that you systematically apply statistical or logical techniques to describe and illustrate, condense and recap and evaluate data. There are many analytical procedures. They provide a way of drawing inferences from data. And the basic idea is that uh, uh, you remove a noise from signal. So basically, when you collect data uh, from your questionnaires, not everything that you get is useful, uh, uh, particularly uh, from a perspective of answering your research questions or uh, proving or disproving your hypothesis. So you have to analyze the data to see what part best answers your research questions or validates or rejects your hypothesis. Why I say that not every part is useful, because if you analyze your statistical data inappropriately, it can distort your findings, and it can actually mislead readers, especially casual readers who quickly go through a paper. They can actually come up with a totally different set of understanding compared to what you want them to understand. And what would happen is that it would negatively influence the perception about your research. Okay, so there are a few considerations that you must have while analyzing your data. First of all, you must have necessary skills to do the analysis, which include skills of using software, and particularly understanding each test means, and how the results of a particular test they can be used for reaching a conclusion about your question or hypothesis. Then the selection of your data collection method and the tests that you perform, they should be concurrent. The the decision that you will do a particular statistical test, it should not come as an afterthought, and it should not be a casual decision by you after you have collected your data. It should you should As we did in our last to last session, we decided that what tests we will perform on each construct. So your data collection methods and the analysis which tests you will perform, they should be well thought of, and they should be decided together. Well, I'm not saying that you should not do additional tests later on. You can do that, but only after you have a very well deliberated plan for your constructs. Especially in qualitative researches, it is very common to come up with new tests later on, because you discover things as you move on. But in purely quantitative researches, it is a good idea to do data collection methods and tests concurrently, or deciding data collection methods and tests concurrently. Then it is very important to draw unbiased inferences, because it can happen very often that instead of you controlling the data starts controlling you. You get a particular kind of data, or you get short of time, and you are forced to get limited data. Maybe there's a cluster that is not responding at all, so you have a data from a particular cluster only, whereas your question or hypothesis, it required comparisons. So it is important that you remain unbiased, even if you need more time. You must tell your supervisor or whoever is sponsoring your research to allow you to make sure that your inferences uh, are based on data that has been collected as planned. Then appropriate subgroup analysis. What does this mean? This means that if you have various clusters or subgroups within your data, you must analyze each and every subgroup in a lot of detail, and the kind of diligence that every subgroup requires. If you do a lot of diligence on one subgroup because you got data early, and little diligence on the subgroups that respond later, it'll surely uh, it'll surely misalign your research. Then the main manner of presenting data. Now, uh, the graphs and the tables and charts that you present in your paper, they make the mind of the reader about your research. and they heavily influence the conclusions that they draw while reading your research. So be very deliberate about it. You must understand what each graph or each table or each figure or each mathematical equation that you write in your paper, what does that mean, how it will influence the mind of the reader, and you include or exclude them accordingly. Then data recording methods, especially in researches when uh, uh, you have a lot of variables and there are many respondents, it is very easy to misplace data or to get lost into data and only select parts to include in your paper. So be very sure that whatever data you collect, whether it is in the form of questionnaires or any other way, it is uh, recorded and stored in a way where you can easily retrieve it to use in your analysis and results part. Reliability and validity, we discussed a lot about it in the last class. And finally, extent of analysis, how deep you have to go with your analysis. In qualitative researches, uh, results is kind of half of the analysis, because results, especially if they are presented in a good way, in good graphs and tables and charts, they kind of do analysis for you. The software does this for you. But in qualitative researches, you really have to do a lot of discussion and the analysis. It has to be really, really deep to come up with some meaningful answers to your hypothesis or research questions. Yeah, in qualitative data analysis, there are basically five categories in qualitative data analysis. The first is content analysis, which means you categorize verbal or behavioral data to classify, summarize, and tabulate it. So the idea is that whatever you get, remember this is qualitative, so you won't have numbers. You will have expressions of your respondents, which may be in the shape of handwritten notes. It may be the notes that you took. It may be audio recordings. So what you're doing is you're analyzing that content and you're categorizing uh, that maybe into words. So and so word appeared so many times. So this means that that particular part of whatever data I've collected is most important. So this is what content analysis is. Narrative analysis is reformulation of stories presented by respondents contextually. So what you do is you not every respondent they are they are articulate. They don't have not every respondent have the best of expressions. So what you do is you reconstruct their reformulate whatever they've told you. But it is important to keep the context intact. You don't have to get out of the context of what their response was. Then discourse analysis. Discourse is basically discussion between people on particular topic. So what you do is you analyze the the discussion that took place. Normally you've recorded it on a tape, so you read it again and you analyze it to see what important aspects were part of the discussion. And then framework analysis, it is very close to the content analysis. The idea is that you construct a thematic framework. Basically, you group the content into themes and then analyze the data according to those themes. And finally, grounded theory. It is usually um, a research before research. What you do is uh, you formulate a theory based on a single case, and then based on that theory, you see if other cases they contribute to the theory, or do they conform to the theory or not. So the idea of grounded theory is that you do not start with a theory, but you look at the case to formulate the theory. uh, Quantitative data analysis, The idea is that you turn raw numbers into meaningful data through application of rational and critical thinking. It includes calculations and frequencies of variables and differences between variables. For example, you are writing a dissertation which is exploring the impacts of foreign direct investment on the levels of economic growth in a particular country, and you're using correlation qualitative data analysis method. So what you have is you have specified FDI or foreign direct investment and GDP as your variables, and you see that the correlation test, it has produced a correlation of 0 0.9, which means FDI and GDP, they are highly correlated. In this case, simply stating that there is a strong positive correlation between FDI and GDP, this is not enough. What you have to do is you have to provide explanation about the manner in which the growth on the levels of FDI may contribute to the growth of GDP by referring to the findings of literature review and applying your own critical and rational reasoning skills. You also need to keep in mind that correlation and causation, they are two different things. Two things, they might seem correlated, but they may not be causing each other. There was this example that we discussed in class, if you remember, uh, in first or the second lecture, that what happened in Australia, what actually happened once in Australia was that people thought that whenever you wear small dresses on the beach, the sharks, they come up and attack you. So the data actually proved it. Whenever if whenever you wear less uh, swimming dress, the smaller swimming dress, the sharks attack you. Every time you did that, the sharks did attack you. And it seemed like a correlation, but there was no causation, because the sharks, they come out to the beach from deep sea in summer, and you wear shorter swimming dresses in summer. So the cause was summer, not the dress, for the sharks coming to the beach. So you have to remember that causation and correlation are two different things, and what you are looking for is causation, not only correlation. So whenever your data tells you that variable A is related to variable B, uh, this is correlation. Causation is what you infer from your rational reasoning skills. So only results are not enough. Your reasoning skills must come in to ascertain that there's causation. Well, then there are many other statistical tests that you do on quantitative data. They can be grouped into basically four uh, distinct groups. One is correlational tests. There are many correlational tests. For example, Pearson's correlation, which is done on continuous data, and Spearman correlation test, which is done on the data that is not continuous. Then there is a group of tests that is basically comparison of means, in which you try to find out the difference between the means of variables, and it includes tests such as chi-square and paired t-test and independent t-test. And then when you're looking at the difference between means of groups, you use ANOVA. Then there's regression, which is basically predicting if change in one variable is related to change in another variable. All these correlational tests, comparison of means and regression, they are used on parametric data. For non-parametric data, there are non-parametric tests. And what is uh, non-parametric data? Basically, it is the data that does not conform to the data distribution that you are assuming. In most of the cases, our tests, they are designed for normal distribution. So non-parametric tests, mostly they are the tests where the data is not normal. So there are many tests which can be used in a particular research, but every test has a particular capability and it is used in particular situations. So the three links that you see on this slide, um, these links, they kind of summarize. The first one, it does it in the shape of a table, and the other two, they do it in the shapes of paragraphs. But all these three websites, they are really good in ascertaining whether a particular test is appropriate for your research or not. So I would suggest that you must go through all these three websites to understand which tests are most appropriate for your research. Now this slide, this shows some tests and their usage. So, but this is just a summary. You must go through all the three websites that I've suggested on the last slide to understand which tests are most appropriate for you. Now, finally, results, discussions, and conclusion. Once you've collected your data and analyzed your data, now it is time to come up with the results of your research. The results, they should be ordered as your research questions or your hypotheses are ordered. So for research question number 1, the result should come first, for then 2, and then 3. For each hypothesis or research question, you have to give the results of descriptive data. Only putting tables is not enough. You must give your commentary on whatever the tables or the graphs or whatever software interpretations, whatever software has given you, you must comment on it. Particularly, the idea is that you express your rational reasoning skills to prove to the reader that whatever the table says, there's a strong non-mathematical logic behind that as well. So you have to relate your descriptive data to demographics as well, where you feel appropriate, because uh, demographics, they give context. For example, the age of the respondent, maybe you would like to correlate the age to their responses. For example, 70% of my respondents said that they use so and so software for digital marketing. But out of those 70%, those who were aged between 20 and 35, they particularly focused on that particular platform or software for digital marketing. So that will give you a correlation between demographics and your results. So you have to uh, uh, use graphs, tables, other tools to make your point. In the discussion or conclusions section, the idea is to summarize the findings and providing inferences and implications of your results. Uh, your conclusions, they should be specific, um, and they should be related to your research questions and hypothesis. You should not claim anything that is not clearly visible from the data, or at least from your inference, from what you have drawn from the data. So, one more thing is that you have to relate your results with existing theory or whatever literature you read. You have to relate it with that as well. So basically, synthesizing it with the current knowledge in your area, whether you are confirming what other studies have suggested or whether you are denying them. If you are denying them, then is it contextual denial? It means well, it worked in Norway, but in Pakistan it works this way. Or is it a total denial, which means you are denying the theory of that particular paper? So you have to be very clear when you are confirming or denying the current knowledge in your area of study. Again, what you have to, as a consequence of relating it to current literature, you have to state what you are contributing to the body of knowledge that already exists on your particular subject. And finally, what you have to do is you have to suggest the areas for future research in your subject. And the basic idea of future research is that you want to tell your audience that how your what you've done can be improved upon, because every research is limited in some way. Sometimes you're limited by time, sometimes you're limited by the scope. You do research in a particular city or a particular country, you do it in a particular industry. So what you have to do is you have to suggest where your research can be improved upon, particularly from a perspective of generalization, from a perspective of application to other industries, other areas, other geographies, etc. So you see this COL written on the bottom of the slide. This is checkoff lists. What I've done is I've put a set of checkoff lists for every chapter of your research paper. Research paper is normally, or a thesis is normally divided into a few sections. For example, there's this introduction or background section, then there's this literature review section, then there's this research methodology section, then the results section. Sometimes analysis section is different, separate from results. Sometimes they're combined. Then there's this conclusion and recommendations section, and there's references. So what I've done is I've um, given you a check-off list for every section or every chapter of your thesis. If you're doing thesis, then chapter. If you're doing a paper, then it's a section. You have to look at, you don't have to essentially follow those check-off lists. Why? Because those are the lists that I've made for my MS students, the students who do MS thesis with me. So they have to essentially comply with each and every part of the checkoff list. But from your perspective, it is just a guidance. It is maybe a reference that you can use in future as well, and in your paper that you're writing for this course as well. So it'll be a good idea if you go through it. So that is all I had for today. I'd like to conclude with re-emphasizing, with saying again that whatever, most of what we discussed today is not in the scope of our course, which also means that it is not likely to be a part of your exams. So since it is not in the scope, it is unlikely to be part of your exams. But we're doing a complete research through a framework that is the second or third slide of our every lecture. So we have to go through it. That's why we have to understand and learn how we go through each step. That's why we studied what we studied today. And what you have to do